to remove a spark plug, so this spark plug has been sitting in the cylinder head for the last 30,000 miles, 40,000, 50,000. Maybe this has been sitting in the cylinder for some bizarre reason. Maybe spark plugs last, I don't know how long, something up to 100,000 miles. There's a good chance, because the aluminium in the cylinder head and also the metals in the spark plug itself will not be fully corrosion resistant. There can be some corrosion, there probably is some corrosion. When you remove the spark plug, it could be seized in the cylinder head. So when you go to remove that spark plug, it's recommended that you remove it when the cylinder and the engine is cold. You do not remove it when the engine has been, after it's just been running. You remove it when it's cold. And the reason for that is because the aluminium is made from, the cylinder head is most likely made from, of a motorcycle, modern day motorcycles, is made from an aluminium or an aluminium alloy, and aluminium is quite a soft metal. When you heat it up, it's actually going to be softer. So you have a chance that you're going to damage the treads on the cylinder if you remove the spark plug when it's hot. So do it when it's cold. The aluminium is harder, it's more resistant to breakage, and then the treads are going to be less likely that they're going to be damaged. As well as that, there's going to be contraction, expansion of the metal, and therefore it's going to be tighter on the spark plug when it's hot. So when it's colder, that treads, the metal is going to expand or contract a little, and it's not going to be tight on the spark plug. So again, that's not my recommendation, that is from the NGK website. So you're going to take your socket, you're going to put it on, and you're going to use your ratchet to remove it. Now again, to help prevent seizure, you're just going to use, I use some WD-40 Specialist Fast Release Penetrant. You're going to use that or something similar. You're just going to put it here, and you're going to put a squirt in it. Not too much, only a little bit, enough that's going to get in. It's going to work its way down through the treads, and it's going to act as an anti-seizure. It's going to help release the treads, or as you screw that socket off, or the spark plug off. So then it's just going to use your ratchet. You're going to twist it anti-clockwise with the ratchet on. It could be quite tight, hopefully not, and you're going to screw it off. What can happen on occasion is, particularly if somebody has over tightened the spark plug in the first place, the shell of the spark plug can actually break. So again, the shell is the outer part of the spark plug, and what happens is the tread part of the shell and the hex head end of the spark plug break away from each other. This is the worst case scenario, so you're left with half your spark plug still in the cylinder of the engine. In that case, you're going to have to, it's going to require some specialist tools, methods to remove that spark plug. You might want to seek professional help if you don't know how to do that. It's hopefully that doesn't happen to you, but that's what happens if you over tighten a spark plug. Now, the other thing that is recommended by NGK is that you check before you actually input the spark plug. It is important that you check the gap between the electrodes. So check the air gap. So again, the air gap is the distance between the ground electrode, which is connected to the negative terminal of the battery, and the center electrode, which is essentially connected to the positive terminal of the battery. Now, if that air gap here between the two electrodes is too much, then the spark plug, or the spark, will not be created, because the current cannot pass between the electrodes from one to the other through the air, because again air acts generally as an insulator, and the potential difference, or the voltage between the electrodes, will not be enough to create that spark. It will not be enough to change the properties of the air to allow that spark or the current to jump from one electrode to the other. So the way you measure that spark plug gap is with well, in my case I have a feeler gauge. Okay, now I think on the NGK website they recommend that the gap should be 0.9 millimeters. In the Honda service manual, they recommend that that gap should be between 0.8 and 0.9 millimeters. Okay. Now, this is not the. It's also recommended really that you shouldn't use a feeler gauge, because a feeler gauge will not give you the most accurate measurement with a spark plug, but it gives you a good idea. It's going to be close enough. So with my feelers here, I actually don't have one that's 0.8 or 0.9, but what I can do is I can take three of them together. So I can take the 0.3 millimeter, 0.3 millimeter, and 0.28. So the feeler gauge is essentially each of these little metal feelers are a particular thickness, okay, for feeling between spaces. If they can fit between that space, then it means that the gap that you're feeling between is at least that distance. Okay, so I can stick three of them together. So 0.28, 0.3, and 0.33 gives me that gives me 0.6, 0.8, 0.9, sorry, 0.91. So I actually want to go, let me just try the three of those. So 0.91. So I shouldn't be able to fit the three of these between this gap in this spark plug. Okay, so let me just try it, and I can't properly fit it. Let me try it. Okay, I can't, it's very tight. Let's three of them together. Again, this is an old spark plug, so I wouldn't be surprised. I can't fit it, okay, so that's fine. So that means that that spark plug is, at least it's not it's not more than 0.9, okay. So let me get out my feelers again, push them back in, out of the way. So now I want to go with 0.28, 0.3, and I want to go with the next one, which is, let me see, the next one here. This is 0.25. Okay, so I have 0.25, 0.28, and 0.33. So that's 0.58 together. 0.82. Okay, so this is near the lower limit. So I should be able to just about get. Realistically, I should be able to just about get this feeler gauge in. Okay, it should be a little bit tight. So I can just about get that feeler gauge in. Okay, so it feels just quite tight. Doesn't feel like there's any space. Okay, I can feel a lot of resistance when I stick it in. Okay, so again, a feeler gauge is not really the perfect way, but it gives a good idea. You don't want to be doing too much pushing because you don't want to damage the electrode with the feeler gauge, but yeah, it feels about right. You can just about get that in. So that means that the distance is between 0.8 and 0.9 millimeters. So that means my spark plug is gapped approximately correctly. This method is probably not off by a whole lot. It's probably pretty accurate, but it's not the recommended way to do it. There is another spark plug feeler gauge that you can get, a spark plug gapping tool, I suppose it's called. It has two functions. It can measure the thickness, and it can also, if this gap was less than 0.8, I would have to adjust this spark plug. So essentially, this earth electrode has to be moved upwards. So it has to be, because it's metal, it will be a little bit flexible. You will have to move that little electrode. Now, what you shouldn't do to move the electrode is you should not stick a screwdriver or something else in here and lever. So you don't want to be levering the earth electrode with the center electrode as a lever point, okay? Because what you do is, not only will you push on the earth electrode, you will also push on the center electrode, and you will possibly push it. The center electrode is basically seated in this ceramic insulator, and you could actually break the ceramic insulator or damage it when you're doing this levering. Okay, so I can do this because it's an old spark plug. Okay, so doing this levering motion will damage the ceramic insulator most likely. But that's essentially, in a way, that's what you want to do, but you shouldn't be doing that. With a proper spark plug gapping tool, it actually has a little wire which actually hooks onto the earth electrode, and you actually are able to pull it. So it only holds onto the earth electrode, and you just tug on the gapping tool, and it causes the earth electrode to just move marginally. Okay, so you don't want to move it too much. It's just a tiny little movement, not much pressure, and you want to recheck it with your feeler gauge or your gapping tool, which is able to measure. Okay, but you want to get that gap correct. If the gap is too much, if it's 1.1 or 1.2, you start giving it a few little knocks. Okay, just start giving that earth electrode a few knocks like so. It's only light knocks, and you measure it again. If it's not enough, bang it again, maybe a little bit more. You should see the gap coming down. If the gap is not coming down, you might have to hit it a little bit harder. You don't want to hit it too hard. You don't want to damage that electrode. But that's how you do it. That's how you change the gap between the two electrodes. So the steps I'm going to describe here for installing a spark plug, these are not my own recommendations. These are the recommendations directly from NGK, or at least my interpretation of what they're saying. Okay, now I've obviously looked into a lot of different sources before I actually changed the spark plugs on my Honda Shadow. I looked into the advice from professionals on how to replace spark plugs, and specifically I got advice from a mechanic who is 30 or 40 years in the motorcycle industry, changing spark plugs probably at least every week, possibly every day of his career. And his advice was that you use copperies. Okay, so copperies, let me just open this up. It's an anti-seize. Okay, so it prevents bolts and nuts, and essentially it's its main use, at least, from seizing. So because a spark plug is threaded into the cylinder head, okay, so you can see the thread here, it's threaded in. It actually, well, back in the day, there was a good chance that when you go to remove your spark plug, that it's actually seized in the cylinder head. So his recommendation was, the way he was doing it for 30 or 40 years, was he was applying a little bit of copperies, just a liberal amount, not too much, to his spark plug, and he was screwing it in. Okay, and then after 30,000 miles with this nickel alloy spark plug, when he comes to remove the spark plug again, he's going to be confident that the spark plug will not be seized in the cylinder head. And that is an important point. You don't want to have your spark plugs seized in the cylinder of your engine, okay? But what NGK say on their website is, don't use anti-seize on your spark plugs. So NGK spark plugs, at least the modern day spark plugs, they're, if you look at the specifications for their spark plugs, you will see that they are generally made, whether it doesn't matter whether it's iridium, platinum or nickel alloy, it'll generally mention that it's I think it's made from a trivalent metal. I don't know how it works exactly, but essentially what it does, whatever way they're manufacturing their spark plugs, you don't need to add copperies, you don't need to add anti-seize compound to the thread of the spark plug, because the way that they're designed to be resistant to corrosion. Now this one does have some little tiny bit of corrosion on it here, but not that much, only barely a tiny amount. But the threads essentially, whatever way they're manufactured, they are resistant to seizure and corrosion. Okay, and what NGK say on their website, I don't know if I have the wording exactly right when I say this, but they say it's unnecessary to use copperies or anti-seize, and it could be detrimental to the workings of your spark plugs and to the workings of your engine long term. That's what they essentially say. I'm pretty sure they use the term it's detrimental. I'll put it up on the video here in writing. You'll probably just see it here somewhere. Their exact wording, okay, just so that I'm not quoting them incorrectly. So you don't put any copperies on NGK spark plugs. Don't use any anti-seize compound on the spark plug, even if it's recommended by a veteran mechanic, because that's what NGK say. So what you do is you take your spark plug. Now the opening for this particular spark plug, where it fits into the cylinder head, it's very easy to access. Some engines, this hole will be buried down possibly that depth. Let me see, hopefully you can see that. Could be quite deep down in, there could be a hole the whole way down. Here it's probably a centimetre or an inch. It could be a couple of inches or a couple of centimetres down. Okay, and it could be very hard to get at. But on this example, I'm just going to show you that for this simple cylinder head, you thread it in by hand, and you have to be careful, because what can happen is you can cross thread it. That means that you don't thread it in properly. You cross your threads, the threads on the spark plug. If it goes in crooked is basically what it means. If it goes in crooked, the threads will start cross threading. You'll feel resistance and you will start damaging the threads. So you want to avoid that. When you're threading the spark plug in, if you're using the right spark plug, it should go in quite easily. So just look at it on this particular engine. You should be able to thread it in quite easily by hand. Never mind the fact that I'm dropping it. But when I'm screwing it in, there should be no resistance. If I feel resistance, I back it out. Okay, so let me just, so there I feel there's no resistance there. So that's what I should feel. you should feel no resistance. Now, if it's deep inside, you might have to use there might be a special tool that comes in the tool set with your motorcycle. You should probably use that because it will be designed specifically for the recommended spark plugs you're meant to use in that engine. But if you don't, I don't have it. I didn't actually have one. That tool was probably lost sometime between 1985 and now, and I didn't have it for my Honda Shadow. So what I used was this socket. It's a spark plug socket. Okay, it comes with my tool set, and it fits on to the spark plug, and it's extra long, so it means that I don't damage the center electrode. Okay, so if it's deep down inside, you might have to use an extension, and you will have to screw it in. Now, just take a look at this. There is no effort to try and get this spark plug in. You tighten it by hand, there should be no effort. At the same time, as well as no effort, it should be screwing in. Okay, so you screw the spark plug in by hand. You do not use a ratchet for extra force. You do not use a power tool. You screw it in by hand. Now, this is not very good. Okay, the reason I recommend that you use the tool that comes with your motorcycle is because it's probably going to be quite solid, and if it's quite solid, as in like it's just one piece, you're going to get a better feel for how the spark plug is getting on. What you can also use is a large straw, so that you suck up your Coca-Cola with from your glass. I've screwed that in a little bit too tight by hand. But you can also use the straw on the end of this. It's just a simple drinking straw. It'll fit onto the top of the spark plug, and it will be so loose, it'll be just tightened on enough to the spark plug that it's made of plastic, so you can't ruin the threads of your spark plug using a straw. It would be not easy to do it. Okay, but once you screw it in, you should feel it screwing. Now, what you need to note before you screw it in is how far does it have to screw in. Well, it's going to have to screw in the length of the thread of the spark plug. So it's going to start here, and it's going to screw the whole way in until it hits this little kind of washer. Okay, so this little sealing, it's called a gasket actually. It's a metal sealing gasket. Okay, until that is bedded down with the head of the cylinder. So the gasket on the spark plug, I think it's made from generally a soft metal like aluminium or something like that, and it's a little crush washer essentially. Okay, and it's a gasket. It provides an extra seal. It crushes when you tighten the spark plug in. It crushes and provides that extra seal. Okay, and that's there to keep the compression and also to maintain the torque on the spark plug. Now, you could use, as I was saying, you could put a little straw, stick it onto the top of this here, and then you just use this little plastic straw, and then you really couldn't do any damage. But you just want to use something. Again, these tools, if you know what you're doing, this tool, I can just start it off there like that, and I can just barely twist it. I'm putting no effort. I'm using my fingers here to twist that spark plug in, and that is quite important. If you're finding resistance and you're having to hack at it, don't do that. There's something wrong. Back it out. When I was doing it with my Honda Shadow, I probably had to back it out about 2 or 3 times because I was not getting it in simple. Alright. Now it should screw down for quite a bit. You should feel that it shouldn't be just simple for 1 or 2 turns. It should be simple the whole way down. Okay. So I can feel that is seated. I was screwing it for quite a while, so I know that it's seated. Because I have this cylinder head off, I have the benefit of looking underneath, and I can see how the spark plug is seated at the bottom. And this is the reason I wanted to show you this. So you can see how the spark plug looks when it's seated in the cylinder. So I'll just rotate that a few times and you can kind of see it's just the electrodes that are sticking out. That's all. Hopefully you can see that quite easily. All you can see is the electrodes sticking out. The threaded part of the spark plug is not sticking into the cylinder of the engine. Okay, and that is quite important. If you use the wrong spark plug, it could either be too long, as in the threads, you could probably see threads sticking out through here. I can't see any threads here. Okay, I can only see the electrodes. So if it was too long, it would be sticking out into the cylinder of the engine. That would be a problem, because the engine is designed for the spark to occur at a particular point. If the spark occurs up here, it's not going to burn as efficiently, because the engine is designed for the spark to occur just here. That's exactly where this engine will be most efficiently burning, if the spark occurs here. If you use a spark plug that's too short, the electrodes could be down below the surface. They could be down where the threads are meant to be. Okay, you might not see any electrodes sticking out here, and again, the engine might run, but there's a good chance the engine actually won't run. But even if it does run, it will not run as efficiently, because the spark is occurring in the wrong location in the cylinder of the engine. Okay, so again, some of these numbers on the spark plug actually reference the length of the spark plug thread. Okay, and some of those numbers actually reference the thread type. So if you use the wrong thread type, it will definitely cross thread, no matter how perfectly nimble you are. If you have the wrong thread type on your spark plug and it doesn't match the thread in the cylinder head, you will cross thread it and you will damage your spark plug and you will damage the cylinder head. You do not want to damage the threads in the head of your motorcycle engine. If you damage those threads, if you strip the threads, damage them, you will have to get a professional most likely to repair that. It can be done by leaving the head on the motorcycle, the engine of the motorcycle. But the best way to do it, if you do strip it and you have to retread that, retread it, if you have to tap it, you would most likely the best course, because when you re-tap it, you're going to knock little metal shavings into the cylinder of the engine, and you do not want metal shavings in the cylinder of your engine. It's going to cause damage. So if that did happen, you would have to, for safety's sake, remove the cylinder head. It's going to need a new gasket. You're going to have to know what you're doing. It's a job for a professional, really. Okay, so you do not want to strip the head. So that's why it's important that you feel that it screws down quite easily. If you used copperies or anti-seize on the threads, it'll actually make it feel a little bit easier getting that spark plug down. But again, NGK recommend that you don't use that copperies or anti-seize. So why do they recommend that you don't use that copperies? The reason that they recommend you don't use it is because the copperies or anti-seize creates a layer between the threads of the spark plug and the threads of the cylinder head. And again, the role of the spark plug, the second role that I mentioned, is it wants to absorb heat through the spark plug and into the cylinder head. Now, if the copperies acts possibly, their belief anyway, is that it possibly acts as an insulator. So it stops heat dissipating effectively from the spark plug into the cylinder head. And if it's not doing that, then the electrodes of the spark plug are going to heat up and they're possibly going to cause detonation. So that's what detonation is, what they mention as a possible risk if you use copperies or anti-seize on NGK spark plugs. That's not my opinion, that's what NGK say. And also, now, we've got our spark plug in. So you've tightened it in by hand. The next thing you're going to do is you need to tighten that spark plug. So you tighten it by hand, using my fingers. There, I have it. I can't go any further with the spark plug. I'm not even going to try with my fingers. The next thing you need to do is you need to tighten that spark plug to make sure that the gasket is crushed properly, that the spark plug is seated properly. Okay, and to do that, I can take a look at the box on the NGK box, because it has some instructions. And what it says here, just there, you probably can't see, it's quite small, but it says you tighten it in by hand in steps 1 and 2, and then to finish it off, to close that little gasket, once it's tightened by hand as far as you can get it, you get a ratchet. Okay, am I using the right one? I think I am. Okay, and you turn it a half turn. So I'm not actually gonna, well, I can just do it here, I'll just, okay, so this is not actually tightening it, I have it to loosen, but just from a ratchet. Once you have it hand tight, you put on your ratchet and you turn it a half turn. On the NGK website, they say you can actually go between a half turn and 3/4 turn. I think it's 3/4, okay? You would not go any tighter than that. So that's what they recommend on the NGK website. That's actually on the box here, okay? Specifically, I think they kind of mentioned that to use that method more so for spark plugs on lawnmower engines and things like that. For a motorcycle, what they actually recommend, if you can do it that method, it should be sufficient. Your spark plug will probably work perfectly. To do it the way NGK recommend for a motorcycle engine is you should have a torque wrench. So with a torque wrench, I turn this little thing, I check the NGK website, or I check the motorcycle manufacturer's service manual or the owner manual. It will recommend the torque setting for the spark plug. You will set the torque setting on your torque wrench. I think it's somewhere between 10 and 25 Newton meters. I think generally, I don't think it's more than 20 Newton meters. I think it's somewhere between 15 and 20 Newton meters torque for my Honda Shadow. You'll use a torque wrench, you'll put it onto your ratchet, and you will tighten it until you hear that click from your torque wrench, and then you know that your spark plug is tightened to the right tightness or torque, and your spark plug is inserted properly and it's going to work most efficiently. So why do they recommend that you torque it to a specific setting, or do that half turn? NGK mentioned, again, it comes down to conducting heat out of the cylinder engine or away from the electrodes of the spark plug into the cylinder head. If you have that torqued in correctly, the spark plug will be seated tightly into the cylinder head, and the tighter it's sealed into the cylinder head, into the treads of the cylinder, the easier it will be to conduct heat from the spark plug into the cylinder head. That's again the recommendation, the wording essentially of NGK. That's not my opinion.